or virtually on the ACAP community website, the ACAP Guilford Facebook page, or our YouTube channel. We are so glad to have you join us. For those of you who are not familiar with ACAP, let me just give you a brief description. At its core, ACAP Community is an educational 501c3 nonprofit organization that offers information, resources, support, and community for those of us who are caring for our aging parents. As you can tell from our name, our focus is on supporting adults as they care for their aging parents. However, all caregivers are welcome, whether they're an adult child, another relative, a friend, or professional. Each of our 8 ACAP chapters, which are spread across the eastern states, offers monthly programs that address issues related to aging, family dynamics, and adult-child caregiving. Presenters are experts on the topics that they address, and many are or have been caregivers themselves for their own parents or their in-laws. ACAP Guilford meets each month on the third Thursday at 6 p.m. at Senior Resources of Guilford at 1401 Benjamin Parkway in Greensboro, and virtually on our Facebook page and the ACAP community website. And you can see a recording of this and all of our other presentations if you go to our YouTube channel. We'd like to thank our sponsor for tonight's program, ACAP Collective. Kevin Pierce, the community liaison, will tell you a bit about the important resources they provide. Kevin?
Thank you, Cheryl. My name is Kevin Pierce. I'm a community liaison with ACAP. That's a mouthful, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
ACAP is Hospice and Palliative Care Greensboro that merged with Hospice and Palliative Care Burlington about 3 years ago, and we became the second largest not-for-profit hospice in the state of North Carolina. ACAP means that you are the author of your care. You drive the bus. Hospice, of course, is for people for whom cure is not possible at this point. It is for folks who are perhaps having those additional symptoms, hospitalizations, maybe increased sleeping. Treatments are not accomplishing what it is we want them to accomplish at this point in time. Hospice can provide a team of folks to come wherever your loved one calls home. That's a nurse, a social worker, an aide to do personal care, and a chaplain if desired, to come wherever your loved one calls home and come as often as your loved one needs us to help manage your symptoms. We're available to you 24/7. We provide bereavement services for as long as you need us. So if you feel like we might be of some help to us, we would love to come talk to you. There's a number on the screen that you can call. There's also an email address. We have a website as well. But in your heart of hearts, if you feel like we might be of some help to you, we'd love to. Give us a call. We are proud tonight to be the sponsor, and you're going to hear some great information tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, ACAP. Now let's turn to our program for tonight. We'd like this to be an interactive program, so if you have comments or questions, please raise your hand and we'll recognize you, or if you're in the virtual audience, go ahead and write something in chat and we'll be monitoring that. You know, our topic tonight affects many, if not most, families as they navigate care. As you know, caring for aging parents may offer opportunities for closeness among family members. We hope all of us bring our commitments, love, and strength to our parents. Still, differences among our family members do arise. Tonight's program is designed to help adult children and their families communicate more effectively, to express their concerns, share the workload, make decisions, generally work together. We are very pleased and appreciative that Alexis Williams of Caregiver Connect will talk with you tonight about those relationships. Alexis Williams is the Executive Director of Caregiver Connect, Inc. She has been in that role for 6 years. Previously, Alexa has been long-term care ombudsman, a social worker, respite care director, long-term care placement specialist, and care manager in the nonprofit and for-profit sectors. She's a graduate of Georgia State University with a bachelor's degree in mental health and human services and has an undergraduate certificate in gerontology. She is a certified senior advisor. When not at work, Alexis enjoys spending time with her husband, John, and their 3 children, Jackson, Avery, Charlotte, and of course, Max the dog. Ms. Williams, thank you.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome. Glad you all have joined us this evening. I am Alexis Williams. I am the Executive Director at Caregiver Connect, and I am honored and delighted to be with you this evening. I will be the first to tell you that this topic is a bit daunting to me. When thinking about what to talk about, I thought it best to kind of give you some background to what I've done with my role at Caregiver Connect and how I feel like I have learned in that role some of the suggestions that I'm going to provide for you this evening. I think it's very important that I stress I am no expert in this. I'm not a counselor. I am not a therapist. I have sometimes served as a facilitator, but I'm really going to hopefully draw from my experience what I have learned with other families, what they have been kind enough to share with me as to what was successful and what wasn't successful. But I think if I tell you about my role at Caregiver Connect and what we do there, then you'll understand better about maybe some of my suggestions. So let's take a look at what we do at Caregiver Connect. Next slide. So at Caregiver Connect, we are a nonprofit business that we like to say serves family caregivers. And we do that in 3 ways. We offer educational opportunities for family caregivers throughout the year. So we partner with various organizations, local businesses that provide services to family caregivers. The second thing that we do is we offer support to family caregivers. And I like to say that our support can be in a lot of different ways, but one of them is that we host online support groups, and then we have an in-person support group as well. And a lot of the kind of material that I have gained that we're going to talk about tonight has probably come from that support group setting. We like to call this support group an encounter group, just because I think, in my mind, I think in the beginning, people were really hesitant when we were first there to come to a support group. And when we called it an encounter group, and we really made it about them, the caregiver, learning about resources in the area, but then probably most important, to meet other caregivers, that was crucial. It was very, very important. So I always encourage family caregivers, if you're not connected in some capacity to a support group, to think about that. There are many, many available now in a host of different entities, different businesses offer them, but I think support groups or encounter groups or opportunities to be with other family caregivers is a great way to learn, to feel you're not by yourself, and then also to kind of become more informed about options in the area. The last thing that I do is, it's under the resources section, is that I try to help families learn about resources in the area where we are, but then also sometimes if you're a long distance caregiver or your loved one is far away, I try to research options for you that might be supportive for you in your caregiving duties. So having said that, when I think about family dynamics and I think about how families come together to conquer family caregiving, I am reflecting on not only my experience in my professional life, but I also am a long distance caregiver. My dad is in assisted living, my mom is in assisted living, and then my father-in-law is now in assisted living. So they're all long distance, and I we have to work together as a family to be able to manage that. So family dynamics are real, and for some people, they're easier than others. And tonight, I'm going to hopefully talk about some ideas to consider when you go about caring for your loved one and everybody within the family, whomever the family may be. I think that's really important to talk about too, is that your family may not be blood kin. It might be family that those are the folks that you've picked, and or who your loved one has picked, and y'all are all having to figure this out together. So I thought that was important to give you a little bit of that background before we go into this conversation. Okay, so next slide, please, Brent. So in my mind, if you are a family trying to navigate family caregiving, it is pointless for nobody to step up to the plate and say, I am the primary caregiver. Because oftentimes, it really, in many, many settings, it's important that somebody is designated the primary caregiver. Primary caregiver, in my mind, means sometimes that you take a hat off. That might be that you're the daughter, but you take the daughter hat off and you put on primary caregiver hat. Because oftentimes how we relate and plan and conquer family caregiving is that we have to step away and put on our hat and go at being a primary caregiver versus being a loved one in a situation trying to navigate these crazy waters. Lots of times I have witnessed that families struggle with determining who the primary caregiver is. By default, oftentimes it is a female, oftentimes it is a daughter, can be a daughter-in-law, but that's not always the case. I think every family is unique and different, but in an effort to continuously, day after day, kind of navigate who is doing what for people, it just really helps to determine who the primary caregiver is. And when I say primary caregiver, oftentimes that means who's going to answer the phone when there's an emergency? Who is going to be the contact person for the doctor's office? Who's the primary person in the hospital setting? Who is going to be the decision maker for the family? Certainly, there can be many people doing many things for the loved ones, and that is really helpful. But oftentimes, more of what I see is there might be 3 siblings. One of them is more involved than the others. And sometimes the primary caregiver is frustrated because they feel like they're doing it all by themselves and they're alone in this journey. So I'm going to kind of take that thought as we move into the next slide and the next topic. So in my mind, I had to come up with something, a word that I could lend towards the topic that hopefully would be a takeaway for you, the audience. So in my mind, I'm hoping that we're all going to strive to be hardy. And I chose hardy for a reason, because I have found that family caregivers deal with amazing scenarios. They deal with complex issues. They deal with complicated logistics of where the loved one is, where the caregiver is, where the caregiver wants to be, where the loved one wants to be. It's never simple. It's always complicated in my mind. And it can go on a very long time. Sometimes things start right off the bat, like there's a crisis that occurs, and all of a sudden somebody is called and they become the primary caregiver. And so if you can go about this thinking, how can I strive to be hardy? I'm hoping that's going to be a bonus for everybody. So we're going to start with the letter H. Okay, so H stands for history. So when we're dealing with families, what I've learned is everybody in that group, whomever family may be, comes with a history. And oftentimes, when we come together with that history, sometimes we've not progressed very far in that relationship from when we saw the loved one on a regular basis versus to now when you're caregiving. So oftentimes what I like to say is, pardon my simplistic pictures, is that everybody comes to this scenario with their own dump truck full of rocks. So let's say mom falls, she goes to the hospital, and the hospital calls the person who's on the list to be called, and that's a local person, a local daughter, a local daughter-in-law. And then the other siblings arrive within, say, 5 to 7 days. Well, what occurred, the history that has occurred with all of them prior to the event probably needs to be thought about. Because as I've pointed out, if everybody has a dump truck full of rocks that are memories and scenarios with their loved ones, we might fall back into interacting with one another like we used to. And we are not thinking about how we're going to interact with each other caregiving for a loved one. This is a new dynamic for many of us. And so I think it's important for families to think about, when you start the process of being a family caregiver, that you consider the history you've had. So often you might have folks who, like in my case, I left when I was 18, and I have probably seen my parents 4 or 5 times a year, and I'm 54. And so my dynamic with them is very, very different than it was when I was 18. But I think sometimes if you look at our interactions with one another, my parents are often interacting with me as if I'm 18, because that's what they remember. That's what they know. I'm still a daughter. Oftentimes it's hard if you've only seen one another 4 times in a year. They have their life, I have my life. We come together to try to problem solve for someone, and that's really hard. I often have to help families kind of think about, this isn't what the loved one expected. So you can't always come in with your ideas, and perhaps the word might be your agenda. It might need to be that you need to consider the loved one. It might need to be that you consider the relationships you've had and how you all have interacted with one another prior to the incident that has kind of prompted this interaction. So in my mind, I think it's helpful to point out history for thinking back, but then also too, sometimes it doesn't have to be that everybody falls in the same role like they always have. So if your norm was to be quiet, some might say passive, some might say not interactive, that doesn't mean you can't change your interactions. It means that maybe this is a great opportunity for you to change your interactions if the idea is to support, oftentimes, the family caregiver. I think it's important to think about boundaries. I think it's important to think about perhaps really what used to occur and what would be healthy to occur in the future. So that brings about the second letter that we need to think about. So we had an H, and now we've got an A. So A is, I think it's important to have a pretty good assessment of kind of where you are right then in your caregiving role. Things change hour to hour as you're caregiving for a loved one. The loved one can change, your life can change, you continue to have life events occur. So I think it's helpful to kind of consider what's going on. And if you can, to be really realistic about what's going to need to happen between the caregiver and the care receiver, or many caregivers and the care receiver. So I also say, let's think from the top down, who's involved in this situation? Is it realistic to think that if there are 4 children, that all 4 children are going to be involved? The next question is Is that the intention of the 4 children to be involved? And are they willing to be involved? And again, I use the word child, but it can be that it's a neighbor who's being really attentive to a loved one. It can be a distant relative. But in my mind, I think it's important to kind of step back and go, okay, mom fell, she's in the hospital, had a stroke. Who's going to be on the team? Who's going to help us with this situation? And if it's not really realistic that somebody who's 12 hours away, who works 10 hours a week, or 10 hours a day is going to be involved, then I think that's important to know. You can ask that person how they want to be involved. May not be the answer you want to hear, but I do think it's important to kind of do an assessment and say, hey, we could use your help. Do you intend to be involved? Would you like to be involved? Can I count on you for your help? Then, after you've asked for their involvement, I think it's important to think about the dynamics that then they're going to bring. Okay, so we had that dump truck full of memories, full of opportunities and experiences, and now you're going to bring everybody together. What's that going to be like? Is that going to be helpful? Is it going to be harmful? Are you going to have to think long and hard about how you're interacting with that loved one? That's going to exhaust you, and now you're not going to be able to focus on the loved one. So I think it's also important to think about what they bring, to not assume that their behavior is going to be the same. You can always hope that their behavior might be different, but I think we need to stand from the top and look down and think, okay, maybe this is an opportunity for things to get better or be more communicative than the time before. Now, another thing to think about is, why does the care receiver need help or assistance? So I have a phrase that I like to use, and my phrase is, we should all be striving for responsible aging. So if we're on the responsible aging end of things, we're thinking about how things are going to change. We are realistic that we need to be resilient. We are open-minded that things will not remain the same, that we're all not 33, and that we can't go play church basketball, and that we are going to change, that every day we're aging. So it helps if the care receiver recognizes that they have changed and is aware of the changes that are going on. And does the care receiver know that they need help? Battery's running low. So those are things to consider. It's really important that the care receiver, if at all possible, kind of contributes to what they think they need help and how, if that's the right way to say that. The other thing I think that's important is to think about how the loved ones can ask the care receiver. What I have learned is that oftentimes we're not successful if we're the caregiver that puts our hand on our hip and we've got our caregiver hat on, and we go in and say, Mom, we need to hire someone to come in here and help you. We need to make this happen today. I have an hour and we're going to make this happen. I'm going to call an in-home care provider and we're going to make this happen. Because what I've learned is oftentimes the care receiver says, I've been doing this the way I've been doing it for a very long time. I didn't ask for your help. I didn't ask for this incident to occur. And you come in here with your plan and not ask me my plan. And oftentimes we do need to ask the care receiver what help they need, if they desire that help, and if they understand that help. Now, having said that, I think it's also important to be truthful with the loved one, to say things like, Mom, I see that your brain is changing. I see your brain is changing because I'm noticing that you're forgetful. or I've picked up on the fact that you can't write the check the way you used to, or that bills aren't being paid, or Mom, could I help you because it doesn't look like you've done laundry. Is your knee bothering you? Is it hard for you to get down the steps? So I think sometimes if we can ask why things may not be happening, are there deficits that are occurring, and help the loved one feel as independent and as competent as possible, then we as caregivers have better success at working towards the goal of everybody working together. I think it's really important for caregivers to recognize that they cannot be a caregiver by themselves. It's not healthy. It does not help our spiritual health. It doesn't help our mental health. And it certainly doesn't help our physical health to try to be the caregiver to someone else if we're not taking care of ourselves. So that's important. So we have an H, we have an A, and now we have an R. Oh, okay. So R means responsible. Responsible out there, audience, responsible. So oftentimes situations are going to dictate that someone is listed as the responsible party. What does that mean in your family? So what I have learned is that if you're the primary caregiver, oftentimes it is overwhelming to be the primary caregiver and the so-called responsible party and the person who is on the insurance paperwork, on the legal paperwork, and also perhaps the financial paperwork, that if at all possible, if there's a way to divvy up the responsibilities, that takes less of the burden off of the so-called primary caregiver, because I think sometimes you have to have a primary caregiver just because that's how the world operates. But then if you can kind of divvy up your responsibilities, that is really helpful. So in my mind, I often tell families, think about what your strengths are within your family. Think about if you have someone who is always good at paying bills, maybe they need to be in charge of the finances. If you have someone who likes being outside, maybe they need to be the person who comes and helps take the garbage out, who comes and does the yard. If you have someone who is really knowledgeable about how to help someone navigate through the healthcare world, then maybe that should be their responsibility. I don't think it's and in this world of caregiving, there is a lot of the world saying to you or about you that life isn't fair as a caregiver. And what I've learned is sometimes that's true. If you're the only one there to take care of a loved one, it probably won't seem fair. And so what I encourage people to do is try to find support outside of their immediate family. See what resources are available in your community. See if there's somebody that you can talk to for guidance. See if there's a service that your loved one can benefit from. And I really think it's important to kind of have a mindset as we age that you're not going to rely on just one person, and then also that things are going to change. Most of us are not going to go to sleep and not wake up. It doesn't work that way. Most of us are going to have lots of situations that are going to require assistance, require support, require help. And if we can make it easier on those that we're going to get that help from, I think the family dynamics can be better. So we've talked about we need to consider the history, we need to do an assessment, we need to think about being responsible, and then there's the T. No, the D, sorry. Oh, it's been a long day. Okay, so delegate. In my mind, we need to help one another, especially help the primary caregiver to delegate, to know what that looks like in their family. So in my mind, delegating, if you're not good at one-on-one in person, then maybe you make a phone call. Maybe you send a text. Maybe you send out an email. But I think it's important that there is some exchange about your needs, about the concerns with the loved one, and then that it's discussed in some capacity. I will tell you that in our family, we're all phone talkers. So we do three-way calls a lot. And I've gotten to the place sometimes that I don't talk with my loved one, any of them, without including someone else. Because oftentimes what happens is the loved one doesn't remember the conversation, and you end up having to call another loved one to say, hey, did you remember that we have to take Dad to the doctor on Friday? And of course, oh no, I forgot. Well, I asked him to call you. He obviously forgot. So why not do a three-way call? Three-way call is, hey, Dad, I'm calling to tell you we've got a doctor's appointment, and I'm reminding Sis that she's going to come and go with us to this doctor appointment. Now, three-way calls may not have been your comfort zone, but three-way calls can be really helpful, and they can be efficient with your time. In my mind, if you're a caregiver, you don't have a lot of time. So maybe the idea of becoming comfortable with the three-way call, comfortable with the FaceTime call, comfortable with sending out emails is a solution. Again, we're thinking about how we can go about bringing people together with the understanding that life is busy. There's a need to exchange information. And I will tell you, in what I've seen with families and with regards to healthcare, we often get involved because of an incident with healthcare. And it is hard to navigate the healthcare system in our country by yourself, much less if you're impaired. So really what I encourage people to do is to bring one loved one or two, if it's all possible, just so that somebody can be good at taking the notes and perhaps somebody is good at asking the questions. Again, that all takes time, that takes effort, that takes communication, but I think sometimes that communication and that openness and family seeing what the other person is dealing with and the circumstances that they're dealing with makes it easier. So we talked a little bit about the communication tools. I think if we can be mindful of all that's out there technology-wise, that is good. If we can be open to change, perhaps you've never been a cell phone person. If you could buy into the benefit of a cell phone, then perhaps that's something to consider. But if not, maybe it's that you are on the landline more than you used to be. Maybe you ask somebody to send out a weekly communication. They're the secretary of your family. They come in, they take the information, and they distribute it out. So that way, too, the caregiver can say, hey, I made my needs known to you. You use I like to encourage families to use an I statement versus the you, because so often it really is about what the primary caregiver needs. Yes, the care receiver has needs, but the person responsible for providing the care is someone who we also need to be considering in all of this. So what is the best communication tool? So figure that out within your group, whatever that is. Again, that takes work, but if you're a family caregiver, you know this takes work. So another thing to think about is there a designated time for delegating? So in my mind, that sounds silly, I know, but like maybe you really don't think well on Friday night. Maybe you're tired. So maybe it is Saturday afternoon while you're kind of reflecting on the week and thinking about the week coming up that you say, hey, I'm going to give everybody a call, or I'm going to shoot everybody an email. Or it might be that you have an app. There's so many apps now that are helpful in caregiving, where literally everybody can have the app on their phone if they have a smartphone, and you can communicate and they can see it and it can notify them of changes. You can also put their medication in for that loved one so they know if there are any changes with the medication. It can also be that it can be a great tool for reminding the caregiver, because guess what? The care receiver forgets, but then so does the caregiver. So it needs to be that we support one another and help each other to remember. One of the last thing is who is in this circle of delegation? So you know, I've been a part of some family meetings where the dynamics were such that maybe two people were really good at communicating, involved, and the other person kind of took a timeout over in the corner, because that's how it always had been. Those were always the bossy ones in the family. They were always the ones that planned everything and did everything. Well, again, that's not really being helpful if that person could contribute to caregiving. So in my mind, we again need to assess what the dynamics have been in the past, and then say, you know what, I really need your help with this. Could you help me with this? I need help with laundry. I need help with bills. I need for you to come and get mom or dad out of my house so I can have my house back for 10 consecutive hours. I hear that all the time. It used to be my home. I willingly, lovingly took in my loved one, but now I just want my house back for just a little bit, so I don't feel the burden of being responsible for this loved one. So in my mind, think about who's in your circle. Think about who you can delegate to ask for help. And then lastly, it's why. So HARDY. And guess what the Y stands for? You. So in this thing where we're trying to communicate with our loved ones, we're trying to address caring for mom, dad, sister, brother, uncle, whomever it may be. Time and time again, you've asked for help. Time and time again, they've not done it. Time and time again, you've tried to be creative with asking for help. Perhaps you sent them a bill, they didn't pay it. Perhaps you asked for money and the money didn't come. Sometimes the only way that dynamic is going to change is for you to decide that things are going to be different for you, and that only you can change how you feel about this situation. Because if you repeatedly come at this and expect someone to change, then more than likely they may not change. Now, I'm not saying don't try. Absolutely try. And if it's not physical help that you need, send them a bill. Divvy it up. Send it out there. I am that person who tells families, it costs money to live. It costs money to provide caregiving. And until we pass away, it costs money. So one way that you can contribute is gift cards. It's paying a bill. It's making an acknowledgement that in someone else's home, they are sharing a space, their time, their energy, and their finances with that loved one. So maybe what needs to happen is, if you can't physically give help, that you can give monetary help. But back to the why. In my mind, it's important to think about so often old ways, our history of dealing with one another, our habits, our quirks, our family dynamics. Sometimes they don't change. But maybe the way to have a different perspective on this caregiving thing is for you to decide that you're going to change, and that you're going to accept this situation and perhaps try new and creative ways to go about this caregiving journey. And oftentimes what I try to help families see is that maybe instead of considering this a burden, you can consider this as an opportunity. Maybe it's an opportunity to meet all these other people out in the healthcare world. Maybe it's an opportunity to meet other family caregivers who are going through the same thing. Maybe it's an opportunity for you to see your family in a different way that you've never seen them before. Maybe this is a time for you all to come together to get to know each other, to value each other, and to create a community for your loved one. Lastly, as we close up tonight, I did want to put Caregiver Connect information in front of you so that if you would like to reach out to us, you can. I am the executive director, and certainly I welcome phone calls if you have questions. I don't honestly say that I have answers to all of these really tough topics, but I'm certainly willing to problem solve with you about them. So I appreciate the opportunity that ACAP gave to me tonight to be here to talk about this subject. And I'm grateful for the opportunity. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Alexis. You have given us so much to think about, both in terms of information and creative responses to caregiving in the community of our families and bit more extended connections. Thank you so much. And thank you again to our sponsor, AuthoriCare Collective. Our next program will be on Thursday, November 16th at 6 p.m. at Senior Resources of Guilford in Greensboro, and of course online. Please come to learn about good eating for bodies and brains, nutrition and aging. Important stuff. Presented by Margaret May of Cone Health. If you would like to be notified about upcoming programs, please like us on our Facebook page at ACAP Guilford or register for any upcoming program on our website at acapcommunity.org. Thank you so much for coming tonight. See you next month.